Welcome to our virtual forum. This is the Mayor Candidates Forum presented by the League of Women Voters of Winnebago County and Oshkosh Media. This forum has been recorded for viewing on Oshkosh Media Cable Channel 10 and on the Oshkosh Media channel on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, or Apple TV. All the forums will also be available at oshkoshmedia.org and on the Oshkosh Media YouTube channel, as well as the League's Facebook page at LWV Winnebago County. I'm Margie Davey, President of the League and today's moderator. The League of Women Voters seeks to inform citizens about major public policy issues and about candidates seeking office. We never support nor oppose any political party or candidate. For more information about the League of Women Voters, you can access our website at lwvwinnebago.org. To learn more about candidates appearing on your ballot, go to vote411.org. Two candidates are competing for mayor for a 2-year term. The incumbent, Laurie Palmieri, is being challenged by Chris Larson. This virtual forum looks a little different, but it still gives you, the voter, an opportunity to get to know the candidates. Since we have no live audience, we asked for questions to be submitted in advance through email or phone. These questions may have been edited for brevity and clarity. Candidates received only the first question in advance. They have not seen any of the other questions. We also encouraged our panelists to provide questions of their own. Joining me on the panel are Karen Schneider, publisher of the Oshkosh Herald, and Nathaniel Schuda, editor, Oshkosh Northwestern. Candidates, our timekeeper will give you cues. Please heed the stop sign so I don't have to cut you off. Thank you in advance for keeping your answers concise so that we may cover as many issues as possible. Remember, this is not a debate. You will each be given the same amount of time for the same question. At the conclusion of this forum, I will offer you each the opportunity to clarify or rebut something said earlier if you wish. And with that, we will begin with our opening statements. You now each have 2 minutes to summarize your background, qualifications, and your motivation for seeking election or re-election as mayor. Why should voters choose you over your opponent? And we'll begin with you, Chris.
Sure, Margie. Thank you for asking. Thanks to LWV for having us once again. Thanks for everybody for being here. It's much appreciated. Great resource for the community. I'll be pretty brief as usual. I am Chris Larson. I'm from Oshkosh, born and raised here. Spent some time up north where I went to college, spent some time in Madison, and then came back here about 13 years ago to open a business in my field, which is a restaurant. I'm running for mayor at this point, primarily under the guise of refining the process of council mayor form of government, making some more efficiencies there, getting back to some accountability between citizens and council to the manager. And in general, just sort of promoting getting people out to vote, getting people more involved, ideas of transparency, so on and so forth, and many, many more things as you'll ask as we go, I'm sure, but that's a good start. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Chris. Laurie, why should voters choose you over your challenger?
Yes, thank you to the League, to the Oshkosh Northwestern, and to the Herald for sponsoring this forum. My name is Laurie Palmieri. I'm currently the mayor of Oshkosh and seeking re-election. I currently work part-time for a logistics company supporting essential healthcare needs as an on-demand medical career. I also provide at-large planning consultant services to organizations throughout the state of Wisconsin, community activities that I'm involved with, aside from the many in connection with the current mayoral role. I'm engaged in Central City neighborhood support activities, community gardens, urban beekeeping, and native planting efforts. I'm also engaged with regional and state organizations on a variety of issues and boards. I have my bachelor's in urban and regional studies from UW Oshkosh, yay, UWO alum, and also a master's in urban planning from UW Milwaukee. I have served on over a dozen city boards and commissions and local private nonprofit boards over the last decade, have served on council for 5 years now. And I believe that I am reliable, responsive, and results-oriented and want to continue to be your voice in City Hall.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to questions from our panelists. You'll have 1 minute to respond to each question, and we will begin with Nathaniel asking you a question. And Nathaniel, your first question will go to Chris.
Very good. One thing I wanted to get right off the bat is a little bit about your thoughts on what the role of mayor should be. Obviously, there's some specific duties that are spelled out in terms of ordinance of what the mayor's job is. But wondering if you can speak a little bit more generally about what do you think the role of the mayor should be, and how would you fulfill that role?
Thanks, Nathaniel. That's a great question. I think the role of mayor, to start with, I don't differentiate between mayor and council. We'll probably get more into that a little bit later. You've heard me talk about it before, but I think mayor is, well, it is in most instances the same as a council seat. And the primary role for me is really easy. It's a matter of being that management position between the citizens of Oshkosh and the city manager, because that is the job of the form of government we have. So I think all of council's job is to be there, ready to act, ready to have appropriate discussions and make decisions on things that are brought before them by the myriad of great committees we have, citizens as a whole, and then to be accountable to those people, and then keep the city manager accountable to the council as well.
Thank you. Laurie?
Yes, thank you. Oftentimes folks will assume that when they contact the mayor that we are equivalent to a Chapter 62 under Wisconsin statutes, similar to Appleton or Green Bay. And, it's an educational opportunity to let folks know that Oshkosh is actually organized under Chapter 64, as many folks are familiar with the council manager form of government. And the mayor is equal to the other 6 at-large council members, and that we don't have aldermanic districts here. So it's equal to the other council members, as well as running the meetings and making recommendations for board appointments to our 23 plus boards and commissions.
Okay, thank you. Karen, you have a question.
So along those lines, and this going to Laurie or Chris?
This will go to Laurie.
Okay, so starting there, typically local government impacts us more than at any other level. So what do you see the role of the local government in people's lives as?
So the role of local government in our residents and our folks who are here in the city, I mean, certainly it's an opportunity for engagement and to be part of the delivery as well as the recipient of basic services such as your garbage pickup, your street maintenance, and basic services, as well as being having the opportunity to shape some of our not only policy but some of our quality of life amenities. And the role of local government is to afford that access to folks in that process, as well as to, handle our infrastructure needs, as well as, I guess, really just shaping your city and your community.
Thank you. Chris?
Sure, Karen. I mean, the role of council and local government in this instance, per your question, is, I believe, to be that conduit between the citizens and or committees and city staff and the city manager. So our job really is to be the direct democracy recipient of the things that come before us. And I think further to be prepared to act on those things, well educated on those subjects as they come up. But you're going to hear me say again, you've heard me say before, that mine isn't a personal agenda here. And as much as I don't mind answering questions as they come up, because I think it's important for people to know how Laurie and I both evaluate subjects like this one and other ones as they come up. But the primary job for me is and will always remain that step between everybody else and city government and getting those things done.
Thank you. Okay, Nathaniel.
One of the things that has come to the forefront here this past year with the pandemic and everything else has been A lot of struggles going on with folks not only here in Oshkosh but across the state and across the country as well, in terms of people falling into poverty and those types of issues. How would you go about supporting, through your role as mayor, helping out people who are either at the verge of that poverty line or near that poverty line, and what can the city do, and what would you do as mayor to address that issue?
Okay, let's start with Laurie.
Oh, I see. I didn't unmute to begin with. Yes, so the role of mayor, as we've already established, is equal to that of other council members, which is a great opportunity because we're voting as any other council member. So when we look at policy that impacts folks economically, I think that it's important for us to advocate and hold accountable the tax dollars and how they're allocated in delivery of not just those basic services, but also, as I said before, the quality of life. And, that can be anything from, closely evaluating what we're getting in tax incremental finance in return for incentives provided, to looking at neighborhoods and what those specific demographic needs are, rather than a one size fits all. And I see I'm on time there.
Thank you. And Chris?
Sure, thanks, Nathaniel. That's a tough question. My hopes are that Oshkosh and any other city is, I hope we continue to get some of those things provided for us from a higher level. So stays on evictions, that kind of stuff exists at the state level for the time being, and the federal level to some degree. I hope some of those things keep up, of course, and if elected, I would be very much in favor of. I think the direct impact, as Laurie mentioned, for what council and mayor can do in this instance for things like that is a little tougher, because it takes policy coming before us to act and be mobile on them. One thing I can say that I think is helpful and that we did a great job with is there have been some initiatives, especially for local businesses, to get people engaged and interested in staying into it. The Love Oshkosh campaign, that was a joint venture between the CVB and council, was a great example of that. So I think initiatives like that will continue, and I will certainly champion them. But I'm hoping that the broader things for economic stuff come from different places and we can be supportive of them.
Thank you. Karen, your question.
Okay, so the city does have its strategic plan, and we've had a lot of community input and a lot of long, hard work done by community members on the different districts and future, what we look at that Oshkosh will look like. So do you support the use of tax incremental financing districts in the redevelopment and industrial projects?
Let's start with Chris.
Sure, and yes, Karen, to answer your question, in general, I do. We're the track record of doing so, I don't think it's something we can stop doing now. Broad stroke, I'm sort of a proponent in a perfect world of private development leading the way more on those things and being driven by city acquiring properties and putting things in places that they think is best, because I am a proponent of private development going that route. That said, I think we've done a pretty good job with TIFs of late. Obviously, we've transitioned to primarily a pay-go method, so that takes a lot of the stress financially off the city. As a big picture, I'm a huge proponent in TIFs of that but-for proposition. So I would like to see projects that can't happen without the TIF being the ones that we focus on. That said, I think pandemic changes a lot of those landscapes, and I'm a lot more forgiving of things now in this day and age than I might have been years ago. There's a couple of great examples now that are apartment driven, and if we can get a handful more people moving here on account of that, that's great. Sorry, Fran.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, let's go to Laurie.
So first of all, you can't see the print here, but it's my favorite thing to read about, benefit cost analysis and tax incremental finance. Center for Wisconsin Policy documents that talk about it. And certainly at the local level, we have been very generous in our use of TIFs here in Oshkosh. Some have performed very well. Some have performed not so well. And I do support TIF, but with discernment. And, the but-for clause is certainly what the statute requires, but we also have an opportunity to delineate the actual criteria and our local policy in what we're getting in return for offering those incentives. Industry and redevelopment, certainly sometimes we need, especially in those industrial areas where there's brownfields and less than desirable conditions. And I see I'm out of time, but I could go on for a very long time about tax incremental finance.
Thank you. Okay, Nathaniel, you have a question.
This kind of ties in with what we were just talking about, and it also is one that was submitted from a member of the public, as was the last question that I asked. And I'm just going to read this one word for word. So it says, we've seen many buildings torn down after years or decades of neglect, and it seems that the only history that remains on Main Street, which is unrepresented and seems to only be able to support bars. How would you preserve the history of the city while improving infrastructure, commerce, and tourism?
Okay, Laurie, take it away.
Okay, so preserving history at the same time infilling with infrastructure, supporting tourism. There was reference to tearing down a number of buildings. And one of the things I have to say, when I first moved to Oshkosh, I was really impressed at how many historical buildings yet remained. And in some situations, we can't just judge a book by its cover. We have to look at, the value added of preservation versus, the use. And I think we've had a number of adaptive reuse scenarios. Look at the beach building. That was an actual TIF that was very supported because of its creative reuse of a building. And sometimes those costs can be very high. And again, I see I'm out of time, but certainly preserving the history while inviting is critical to continuing that heritage of our architectural richness here in Oshkosh.
Thank you. Chris.
Sure, Nathaniel, as someone who owns and operates a grocery store in a building I own that happens to be 146 years old that's on Main Street, I'd take a little bit of difference to the fact that they can only support bars because the grocery store business is fine. The bike store business works as well. So, I hear the point. I would beg to differ, I guess, in general for personal reasons. But also, to Laurie's point, our downtown, we are extraordinarily blessed. You've all been to different cities where you see different things. We have a myriad of lovely historic buildings, and we're very lucky to have them. And in general, I think we do a great job of preserving them. Former Mayor Cummings led an initiative with plaques. There's still plaques going up indicating when businesses were. There's still historic tourism tours coming at some point in time, I would presume. And I think that the city has done a pretty good job of the buildings that do go away for good reason and are replaced with appropriate things as they come up. But I promise you, it's just not bars and old buildings. I can tell you from personal experience.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Chris. Just to be clear, that was a submitted question that Nathaniel was reading. So he's not the one who thinks there's just bars on Main Street. It was whoever submitted the question.
I wasn't blaming him yet.
Let's go to Karen for another question. Before you ask that question, Karen, because there are just the two of you, would you be amenable to having 90 seconds for each question? Would that help you out some? Let's give that a try. Fran, if we could use 90 seconds for the following questions, let's see if that gives them a little more time. Okay, Karen, go ahead. And this question will first be going to Chris.
Okay, so this kind of goes hand in hand with that and is also a submitted question. What would you do to tackle the issue of blight and vacant land in the city of Oshkosh?
That's a good question too. It's a hard discussion right this second. I'm not going to say the city's doing everything they can, but I think we are doing a lot. establishing Sawdust District as a district and putting incentives in place to develop that area is helpful. To Laurie's earlier point, again, we have not been shy as a city about giving out TIFs where we think development will come from them. Beyond that, it's sort of a wait and see thing. I mean, we can have a much broader discussion about tax levies, infrastructure, how those things look, and how those types of dollars influence growth economically in general. And that's a big, hard subject, but one we're going to have to tackle at some point. I presume we've got 45 more minutes, so those questions I'm sure are coming, but it's a tough one. So to answer your question directly, Karen, I think we've done a pretty good job of late. I'm sure Oshkosh will, no matter which one of us is mayor in the end, we'll keep doing things like that. And there are great opportunities for development. And I think more and more people are figuring that out. So I think we're on the right track, but the more we can do, the better.
Thank you, Chris. Laurie?
My favorite topic. So I had the opportunity in 2013 to work with a great group of graduate students down in Milwaukee on a vacancy plan for vacant lots in the Lindsay Heights section of Milwaukee. And that spurred my interest in vacant land. And before I talk about opportunities for vacant land, I want to say that blight, how you define blight is open to interpretation. However, there are some efforts to define the criteria of meeting blight. Vacancy doesn't always mean blight. Vacancy can mean opportunity, as we know. But on some of the smaller infill vacant lots, I mean, there's some really creative things that we can do. There are a number of folks in this community who are really interested in things like urban orchards, small right-sized homes, affordable options that, again, it depends on whether you're talking about infill or you're talking about larger, industrial vacant lands. Now, we certainly could do a better job, I think, of promoting, and signage is a very simple way in which you can let folks know when they're passing by a vacant lot, whether or not that's a city-owned vacant lot for development, because oftentimes people just look at vacant lots and they don't know that that's privately owned, and it's certainly up to the owner. But yes, vacancy, blight, one of my two favorite topics to work on. And again, it's all open to interpretation on blight.
Thank you, Laurie. Okay, Nathaniel, another question, please.
I'm trying to figure out which one I was on here. Another thing that kind of came to the forefront in this past year with the pandemic and folks social distancing and all those types of things has really been something that Oshkosh has had a lot of in the past, and that is outdoor recreational opportunities. And with the pandemic and people perhaps getting outside and those types of things, how would you encourage, another submitted question, how would you encourage recreation in the city of Oshkosh?
Okay, let's go with Laurie.
Yes, this community is blessed with an abundance of outdoor recreation. I mean, we've got the river, we've got the lake. We have a good fair number of parks, and just recently adding the new Lakeshore Park under development. And, one of the things that came up when I first got involved in local government was as a young aspiring planner organizing in the neighborhood. We had a very limited amount of green space in the central city, Census Tract 5, Census Tract, I believe it's 2. I may be misspeaking there, but we went to the Parks Advisory Board to ask for more green space in the central city because as the league knows, because they wrote a research position statement on this, we have somewhat of a shortage of green space when you look at the national per capita standards, but certainly to encourage more outdoor recreation. I mean, I think people are discovering that on their own with the other limitations that were in place last year, but we certainly could do better in the central city as regards to green space.
Thank you, Laurie. Chris?
Good question, Nathaniel. I mean, as far as encourage, again, I think we're sort of on the right track. Lakeside Park stuff, I love. I like what's going on. The fact that there are trails is awesome. Council's done a good job in the last handful of years as a dog owner and a downtown liver. I appreciate the fact that now my dogs can walk on the trails through Menominee Park, which is awesome. I am, probably not everybody knows, but I'm one of the co-founders of Slow Roll Oshkosh, a little biking event that was once a month for a while. We took last year off, of course, but that grew from 10 bike riders a month to about 300 bike riders per month on a Wednesday evening, which is kind of nice. To that point, I've been active and involved in Bike Ped committee and getting those types of things, not to focus only on bike riding, but we do have some lovely bike riding around here. So lots of good initiatives, I think, in place, and I would, of course, be in support of more as they come up.
Okay, thank you. Karen.
Okay, so let's see. So at least for the last 3 years, we've been talking about assessments and alternative ways to fund assessments, be it a wheel tax or whatever the case may be. And we haven't really, well, we haven't come to a solution. So in your opinion, where do you lean as far as a solution on the assessments?
Okay, Chris.
You know I can't do this one in even 90 seconds. Laurie's tired of hearing me say it. I'm just kidding. It's a good question, Karen, and I appreciate it. I fall pretty squarely on the addition of a fee to replace assessments. This is one where you'll have to yell at me online if you want more information about it, because I can't cover it all now. But I do think that we've set up a not equitable scenario with home ownership, and we do need to solve the problem of street assessments. Wheel tax is a tough one. It doesn't quite work. The best one, in my opinion, is a fee-based by parcel policy. What it does is great things, is that would allow the city to stop borrowing money to make improvements. There's a lot of cost savings that come with that by having the money up front. And the math in a system like that indicates that no one pays more for an assessment than they do now, presuming it's every 50 years or so. So there's a lot to cover there, and I can't get anywhere near it in 90 seconds. I'm not going to let you show me the stop sign, Fran, because I won't come anywhere near it. But in general, to answer your question, Karen, I'm in favor of some sort of fee-based system to replace the policy we have currently.
Thank you, Chris. Laurie?
Yes, currently there is an opportunity to support the governor's budget proposal, which includes an item of a local sales tax at the municipal level, which could be an option, as well as I think, the counties had the opportunity to add that as well, a 0.5% sales tax. I do support a transportation utility fee on the basis of impervious surface, along with consideration of the currently in process study that's being done regarding trip generation as a method for possible calculation. I know that Neenah, they have a different calculation. Janesville was considering this trip generated one, but we could also look at a hybrid of including a vehicle registration fee, a small one, in conjunction with something along those lines. The least desirable way in which to cover more of the special assessments would be a levy increase, or folks trying to keep housing affordable means also trying to keep some of those costs down. But I think we have to be creative in pulling some things together, because it's been hashed and rehashed, and we can't give up on this.
Thank you. Okay, Nathaniel, next question.
Next question actually is quite short, but feeds off of something that the previous speaker just said, and that is, would you support a local sales tax?
Okay, let's start with Chris.
Yes, very much. I hope it comes to fruition. Anything in my power, elected or not, that's a great idea. I desperately hope, as Laurie mentioned, that could be something that could be applied to something like street assessments, because it'd be great use for those funds. Oshkosh in general is a perfect example of a community that should have this, primarily because of what we do with tourism. There are tourism uses that happen in our city that can be funded by this kind of thing, which is fantastic. And as Laurie mentioned also, we're secondarily at a deficit there, as we're one of, I think, 3 counties in the state that does not currently have a county 0.5% sales tax either. So yes, very much. I hope it happens, and anything I can do to help make it happen, I'm all in favor of.
Thank you, Chris. Laurie?
Well, it would take a referendum, according to the way that's proposed. So it would be up to, folks here in the community to move that forward. But I think, once educated on the benefits of that, certainly, as I stated before, it is an option.
Okay, thank you. Karen, question.
This is a bit of a workforce question. Attracting and retaining good employees is always a challenge. If you're elected mayor, how will you ensure that City of Oshkosh employees feel valued?
Okay, Laurie.
Well, I don't think it's a question of whether or not we just value City of Oshkosh employees. I think we have to value all employees. The workforce here is what helps, our manufacturers and our other businesses succeed. And attracting, as you said, attracting and retaining, also requires the active inclusion, the very active part of inclusion and welcoming folks from outside the city, outside the state. And as far as, specific to our city employees, I think that we do a pretty good job in rewarding our city employees with a very generous, benefits in that. At the state level, I could see, if Act 10 were repealed, that might be a little bit different story in terms of their ability to collective bargain and construction contracts and that kind of thing. But certainly it's on all of us, not just the council and the mayor, to be welcoming and inclusive to folks in the workforce of all employment sectors.
Thank you, Laurie. Chris?
Sure, Karen, a little bit with specificity to your question, how do we make sure city staff feels valued? I'm on a couple other boards that are akin to what council and manager does, and that there's a fairly highly paid executive. And what I've learned and what I think is important in that setting is to not micromanage those things. So council's job and mayor's job in this case is to make sure that the city manager does a good job. Making sure city staff feels valued is entirely up to him, and that would not be something that I would propose council or mayor gets involved in, because that is the job. HR things are the job of that managerial position. So unless there's an issue there, it's not something I would meddle with.
Okay, thank you. Karen, I'm going to let you ask the next question. I know that's out of order.
You're coming back to me?
I am.
Okay, so would you support adding resiliency factors to the checklist for each capital improvement project in the city? And do you believe that they should be legislatively mandated?
Let's go with Chris.
That's a harder question than usual, Karen. And it's going to be short answers from me because there's a lot to dig into there. Yes, resiliency, and can you provide more fidelity on what you mean by mandating the resiliency factors thereof? Not that I don't understand the question, it's just a little vague for me to answer without being really short, and I'm trying not to be.
Really looking at the sustainability of the projects long-term, and having a checklist of accountability for those.
On CIP stuff primarily, correct?
Correct.
Is that the question?
Yes.
Then yes, absolutely. I'm not so sure I would go so far as to say mandating those requirements with them as far as the checklist goes. But in general, yes, great policy, of course.
Thank you, Laurie.
I love this question. My master's thesis was on resiliency and sustainability, kind of on a spectrum. As relates to capital projects and whether or not we need to legislatively mandate some of the criteria, the checklist, There are times when we need to be a bit firm on these things for accountability purposes. And certainly, these are huge investments that go into the next generation paying for, and the next generation are those who will be utilizing those municipal assets, right, as we develop them. And they sometimes have a little bit higher price tag initially, but in the long term, based on our other requirements, there's something called a life cycle analysis, and this is not a 90-second response topic, but I'm glad that we're having that conversation because it has been absent in some of our public discourse, or at least some of our council discourse of recent years. So it's my hope that over the next 2 years, we can do things like what Green Bay does, look at things like a resiliency coordinator, green teams, and working in some of these, I know I'm out of time, working in some of these aspects. And if that takes a legislative mandate, I'm okay with that.
Okay, thank you. Nathaniel, a question, please.
Another short one. What do you think are some of the most important infrastructure projects facing the city? Kind of speaking to that CIP capital improvement question from before.
Okay, let's go to Chris.
Sure. Not to sound like there's a singular focus on that subject, but I'm sort of back to assessments. And I think if we can solve that problem with street assessments, that opens a lot of doors up for other things that would come forward. So fixing the monetary side of that without raising the levy, as Laurie mentioned, I think is a huge step in the right direction. And then there'll be all kinds of other things we can address thereafter.
Okay, thank you. Laurie?
Well, I'm going to go back to it depends on how you define infrastructure, but generally speaking, infrastructure, most of us think of, streets, our water utilities and such. But there are other elements to our infrastructure, such as our housing stock, which is critical. And it goes back to attracting and retaining a workforce, having affordable housing, a variety of housing. Right now, we know that there's a shortage of both. Our most important infrastructure projects right now have to do with continuing our stormwater utility improvements, our street investments, as well as, again, going back to talking about green space and outdoor recreation. So one other thing I would add to that is I think it's important for us to also look at things like broadband access. There are parts of the city, believe it or not, where, because of the density and population and the limited number of providers, that's an issue. And right now, I'm really interested to see what happens with the Midwest Renewable Energy Association's lawsuit with the PSC, the Public Service Commission, over use of solar and third-party financing.
Thank you, Laurie. Okay, Karen, next question.
So I'm just going to continue on that a little bit more, but what do you believe the city could do to help increase availability of internet access to Oshkosh residents? Because this has become quite an issue during this last year with COVID as well, and people working from home and students doing virtual learning.
Okay, Chris.
Sure, and that's a tough one, Karen. I don't know that the city can do much right this second. I know there are programs out there and that they're coming. Maybe that's a good question for council candidate Bill Miller, because he's an expert in the subject. But it is absolutely an issue. It's an equitability thing across the board. We're seeing it currently with vaccine access and getting right people in the right place to get the appointments they need, and online access is important for that. So it's something I'd be supportive of course, but to answer your question, I'm sorry that I don't have a specific answer as to how the city can make that happen right now.
Thank you. Laurie?
And, this is a good stumper question because I am maybe a little bit limited, but I can tell you that over the last year, there have been a handful of, inquiries about what the city might be able to do in assistance to providing additional broadband. We may not necessarily be a provider of broadband, but I can see us investing in, free Wi-Fi down at, Peace Park, Opera Square, that can enhance some of our, economic development and tourism, as well as some of the partnerships. Maybe, city manager indicated that, we're limited in what we can do as far as, Wi-Fi and internet, but the school district has a pretty robust, and even though that's been challenged, network, that perhaps there may be some partnerships there that could be bolstered.
Okay, thank you. Nathaniel, next question, please.
Speaking of infrastructure and capital improvement projects and things like that, wanted to ask specifically about one that is happening right now, and kind of looking forward in terms of the Lakeshore Community Park plan. And this might have been a question that we got to the last one, but I'd like to expand on it a little bit again. Obviously three-phase plan is what's being talked about now. The total cost of about $10 million. Four Seasons building is going up here, underway right now. The question being, would you actively work to complete phase 2 and 3 of the plan? And if so, what kind of time frame are you talking about?
Okay, Chris.
Sure, and yeah, of course, to answer your question, Nathaniel, it's important stuff. I was a proponent of the park becoming a park in the first place. I think, and it's still going to be a sensitive subject for many years, but I think the space is better used now than it was before. I have a lot of faith in Parks Director Maurer, and I think he's passionate about this in the right ways. I'm glad to see it's all moving forward, and yes, I'm in supportive of whatever timelines he thinks are appropriate to get that done. I think are fantastic because it's a great project.
Thank you. Laurie?
So the question was whether or not I would actively pursue completion of phase 2 and 3 of the plan. And certainly I am in support of that. One of the challenges has been, while that was a great opportunity and I supported us getting more access for people to that space that was limited previously, there's also the question of how it got bumped up priority wise. But certainly, this does speak to what we were talking about earlier, additional access to folks, outdoor recreation. And it's an absolutely worthy cause of promoting phase 2 and 3 completion as soon as we possibly can. But we also have to be, cautious in our prioritization and making sure that we're also taking care of our older parks, Menominee, South Park, and some of the neighborhood parks as well.
Okay, thank you. Karen, next question, please.
Well, that was kind of a nice segue to this one. So neighborhoods are of city strategic plan priority, particularly central city neighborhoods, both north and south of the river. What are the most important factors in stabilizing and improving the neighborhoods? And what specific role do you believe that the city should play?
Okay, let's start with you, Laurie.
So yes, as was mentioned, strengthening neighborhoods is one of our pillars in our strategic plan, and it has been for a number of years. I was very fortunate to be in on the initiative which brought neighborhood identity even into the discussion here over 10 years ago. And I worked with the city as an intern when I was working on my degree, and had the opportunity to do some surveying and be part of that initial team, resident team leadership with NeighborWorks. And that's morphed into, the Great Neighborhoods Initiative. Actually, it's called Our Neighborhoods Engage. Stabilizing and improving neighborhoods, especially the central city, where again, you have a very, for example, Census Tract 5 has 6,600 people living in a square mile. It's a little bit different than Census Tract 2 over Stevens Park, where things are a little more spread out, or even, as you said, West Haven, and that it's much more sprawling. So these denser areas need infill development. The stabilization comes from promoting not just home ownership, but taking care of properties. And I'm really fortunate to live in that area and have the opportunity to work on those things, both as a resident and as a representative for folks. Improving those neighborhoods is vital to what we're investing in. And I'm out of time.
Thank you, Laurie. Chris.
Sure. I was just going to say, Laurie, you can take my time. It's fine. I'm just kidding. We agree on a lot of this. We're neighbors. We live in the same neighborhood. I was so excited when I first saw H&I stuff coming up here, because my time in Madison, that was a big part of where I lived, and you knew what neighborhood you lived in, you knew why it was called what it was, and it's fantastic. So I'm pleased we're still working on that. It's wonderful that there's funding within the city budget on an annual basis to support neighborhoods, the naming thereof, in the projects in them. I'm one of the founding groups of one that doesn't exist yet. There is a downtown neighborhood association coming. Our public meeting was scheduled to be March, I think, 19th of 2020. And obviously we all understand why that didn't happen at this case. So we're a little behind on getting that neighborhood association formed, but that will be one I'm particularly proud of because that's my neighborhood. So all great things. And I love the question. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Nathaniel, your question, please.
What do you think should be the role, or the city's role rather, in development, specifically downtown? Second part of that question, what is the city doing enough to promote business and industry?
Okay, Chris, why don't you take that first?
Sure. I think we covered some of that before with the city and developments. Obviously, I mentioned Sawdust District being a good decision for the time being. So as far as what the city can do, I think we've been over some of that with TIFs and so on and so forth. Attracting business and economic development is a big part of what I've done the last decade. I've been on your Downtown Oshkosh Business Improvement District Board of Directors. So that's one that's near and dear to my heart. And I can tell you the focuses there, I think, do work, and it's great to see an organization like GoEDC does some of that as well. So it's good that there are relationships within the city that support those specific types of development stuff. BID, for example, the focus on beautification, parking, and recruitment. And I think GoEDC does a good job with that as well. So I think, Nathaniel, to answer your question, some of it we're doing, and they're all pretty good things.
Okay, thank you. Laurie?
Yeah, so as a geographer, I depend on relationships, both spatial, the where, and ecological, the living environment perspectives to frame this and identify understanding people and places. We need both of those perspectives for communities that share land use. But with that said, I believe that we need to really prioritize infill development across the city and don't limit my view geographically, as I think we need to encourage more, what I would say, micropreneurial opportunities. We need to build an entrepreneurial ecosphere that is your 6 C's: confidence, courage, capital, capacity, collaboration, and critical mass, to support creation of those small and scalable businesses, especially with an eye towards our economic resiliency and recovery. A creative example for the city's role in that could be, something as simple as, looking at some of our home-based business, some of our municipal codes, and reviewing what has last year taught us, and how can we learn from how people are using space differently. We can't necessarily continue the way we've always done things. Our new normal is going to require some different thinking on this.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Karen, one more question, please.
All right. So if I only have one, I'm going to go with this one. Would you support forgivable business loans for minority communities? And if so, how will you commit to make that happen?
Okay, let's start with you, Laurie.
Okay, so let me just clarify. So would I support forgivable business loans for minority communities? And what was the second half? What would I do to commit to that?
Correct. What would
Okay.
you do to make it happen?
So, currently, that really does kind of go back to this idea of some of the micro business support, right? I think that women and minority owned business, as well as veteran owned business, does need extra support. And I would support not only forgivable loans, but grants, with some kind of, mentorship involved there. And I've referred a handful of people over to Go EDC. And, some of the WEDC, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, requirements for some of the funds that come out tend to pigeonhole in only high growth and tech startups and that. There's a little bit of agro business blended in there, but I think, again, we could do more at the local level in terms of supporting and creating that entrepreneurial ecosphere.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Yes, Karen, I would be fully in support of. I think it's super important, and it speaks to the broader health of any economy if we're supporting minority-owned businesses. So yes, it's a great idea. And initiatives there are going to be really important going forward, especially in this post-pandemic thing, because that's a rising tide in all ships type of thing, which is great. So it's a great place to focus on. I hope we can do so.
Okay, thank you. And Nathaniel, your last question?
Okay, you put me on the spot here. I thought when you said the last question, I had in my mind that was the last question. Hang on, let's see.
Oh, that was Karen's last question. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Let's go with the one of the last, if not the last, submitted question. I want to get those in here. How would you encourage people to move to Oshkosh, to come to Oshkosh? But also, second part of that question, how would you encourage people to stay here once they're here?
Okay, Chris.
That's the actual $1 million question, right? I mean, it's all the things we've talked about and all the things we haven't talked about today with tax levies, how they relate, what we do for infrastructure, so on and so forth. So I'm not to get super vague, Nathaniel, with your answer, but we've hit on a lot of it. And I think the more we can support growth in general, and again, we talked about lots of those things, that's sort of the answer, right? We need to make this place as attractive as possible. I think we'd all agree that there are some wonderful natural things that we have here. We have an awesome downtown. It's historic, it's pretty, it's larger than most. We're really blessed that we have a river running directly through our downtown and our city. So we have lots of the things covered, but it's going to take some creative thinking going forward, and primarily monetarily, about how we do things involving infrastructure in general, which we talked a lot about, and the other parts of that. I mean, this is a great example. If you watch back the last hour, that all those answers are in there somewhere. And if we get them all right, we'll get all the things Nathaniel's asking for.
Thank you. Laurie?
I love this question. So the question of, how do we get people to move to Oshkosh, and how do we get them to stay? First of all, I want to say that I think many people are looking at cities like Oshkosh to maybe unburden themselves from some of the super dense metropolitan and urban environments. And we're kind of in between, right? We're not quite big city. We're not quite rural. We're kind of Reuben, right? So that urban rural cross connection. And part of that is, I think, some cities have been really creative with incentivizing, hey, come establish in Oshkosh. And, I'm thinking of a handful of cities across the country. We'll help you with a small, down payment assistance on a home, or perhaps help you with getting some of your student loans forgiven, because we want to encourage, because of the growth in our elder population here. And I'm going to end up going past my 30 seconds on this. But I think that in order we have to look at incentives, and we have to be including folks. And as an outsider who moved here, I found it a really big challenge to kind of break into the community. But what I did was, and as many do, you start volunteering with different efforts that align with your interests, and then you build that new network. And as someone who moved around my entire life, I certainly had that skill. But then once they're here, we need to make sure that there are housing opportunities and not just tourist opportunities, right? One of the things I introduced here recently and we'll be seeing at the council is the Poet Laureate program, establishing a city poet laureate. We need to continue to build our arts and cultural aspects and assets. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. Okay, well, now we have an opportunity for clarification if anybody needs it, or if you'd like to expound on anything that we didn't give you enough time for. Yeah, if you can remember which ones those were, right, Chris? Your opportunity for clarification gives you 1 minute to clarify, rebut, or just make a statement. And we'll go with you first, Laurie. You're muted.
Whoops. Since we didn't have an opportunity for any rebuttal or back and forth on some of these topics, I'm going to take that opportunity now. And I think pose a question to Chris in that, we touched a little bit about the role of city government, local government, council members, the mayor. Just kind of curious, how Chris feels about things like conflict of interest when you may or may not be considering compensatory issues. It may be whether or not you're on a board or commission that would be a recipient of funds from the city, and how he feels about conflict of interest, and whether or not you should be voting on that or recusing yourself. So it's a little bit more of a procedural piece, but I'm just interested in knowing that. So I'm taking that opportunity to throw that question out there today.
Sure, and I think easy one, I might need a little bit more specificity because I'm of course on about 1 million boards with that have these same kind of issues all the time. Wisconsin Restaurant Association is one where it always comes up because there's antitrust stuff and all kinds of things there. So I'm really good at recusing myself if need be. And I think, the vague answer to your question, Laurie, is obviously, to me, it's any involvement whatsoever, especially compensatory. So you want to clarify based on specific issues? I guess I'm a little confused as to where you're coming from. Not that it's not a great question, because it is, but to me, it's a pretty fine line, and it's any involvement whatsoever.
We're going to go with that.
Well, no, it's a good question. I think I just don't know where we're trying to wind up.
Well, if we go back and forth, it becomes a debate, so I can't.
I thought we had all the time. I was just kidding.
Okay, so with that, we're going to conclude this forum for the Oshkosh mayor. On Tuesday, April 6th, you may vote for one of the mayoral candidates, Chris Larson or Laurie Palmieri. The polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you need to, you may register when you go to vote on election day. Just take a proof of residence with you. Everyone must show a voter ID that has a photo on it. Go to myvote.wi.gov to find information on registration, ballot, acceptable photo IDs, and polling places. Go to vote411.org to learn more about the candidates. You may also consider voting early or absentee. Please contact the city clerk for more information. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Winnebago County, I want to thank everyone for participating in this forum. We appreciate Karen Schneider and Nathaniel Shuda, our journalists who act as panelists for us. We're grateful to Oshkosh Media for continuing to support our forums. And I want to thank both of you, Chris and Laurie, for running for office. Remember, our democracy depends on citizen involvement. Please, everyone, vote on April 6th. Thank you.